Hello guys, welcome back to the MedLife. So in today's video, we're going to talk about cerebrospinal fluid. Here is a picture of how it flows, where it goes, and where it's produced from. So in this video, we'll discuss all these structures of the cerebrospinal fluid, what it is, where it goes from, where it's coming from, and what it does, and some clinical relevance as well. So first of all, what is cerebrospinal fluid? So it's a clear, colorless fluid which has some inorganic salts in it, and it's located inside the brain, and it also goes through the spinal cord. So it's in the subarachnoid space of the brain, and in the spinal cord, and also in the ventricles of the brain. So how is it formed? So the cerebrospinal fluid is mainly formed in the ventricles, the lateral ventricle, the third ventricle, and the fourth ventricle. But majorly, it's formed 80 to 90% of the cerebrospinal fluid is formed in the lateral ventricle. And in the ventricles, we have a structure called the choroid plexus. Choroid plexus. In each ventricle, we have this structure called the choroid plexus. These are some epithelial cells that produce this cerebrospinal fluid. And 80 to 90% is produced by the lateral ventricle. And it also originates from some ependymal cells that line the ventricles. So in this picture, if you have a look, this is the lateral ventricle, this blue part over here. This one is the third ventricle, and this shape over here is the fourth ventricle. So in the lateral ventricle, you see this pink structure over here. This is the choroid plexus of the lateral ventricle. This one is the choroid plexus of the third ventricle, and this one is the choroid plexus of the fourth ventricle. So these are the choroid plexuses. So where does it go? How does it flow in the brain? So we said it originates from the ventricles, from the choroid plexuses. But where does it go? So if we start from up, from superior, it's located in the in the lateral ventricle. It originates from the choroid plexus there. So from there, it passes through the interventricular foramina, or the interventricular foramen of Monro. Foramen of Monro. It goes to the third ventricle. From the third ventricle, via the cerebral aqueduct, it goes to the fourth ventricle. Then in the fourth ventricle, remember, in each ventricle, it's being added. So 80 to 90% is produced from the lateral ventricle. Then when it goes to third ventricle, some other fluids also is added to it. Then it goes to through the cerebral aqueduct, goes to the fourth ventricle. Over there also, through the choroid plexus, it's also added to it. Then it goes to the median aperture and lateral aperture. So there are two foraminas in the fourth ventricle, which it goes to the subarachnoid space through. So via these two, which are called the foramen of Magendie and foramen of Luschka. Luschka and foramen of Magendie. Then it goes to the subarachnoid space, and over there, and some of it goes to the spinal cord, and some of it which goes to the subarachnoid space, it surrounds the brain, which we'll have a look at it, how it's absorbed. So this is its actual course. If you see, this is the lateral ventricle, 80-90% produced from this choroid plexus of the lateral ventricle through this, from this structure, the interventricular foramen of Monro. It passes through here, and it's added on it, on the choroid plexus of the third ventricle. Then from here, through this cerebral aqueduct, it goes down to the fourth ventricle. So here, this is the fourth ventricle. It's also added to it through the choroid plexus of the fourth ventricle. Then through these median and lateral apertures, which we said the Magendie, foramen Magendie, and foramen of Luschka. Then it goes to, some of it goes to the spinal cord, as I already mentioned here. the spinal cord, and some of it goes back to the here, posterior to cerebellum, and from there it goes to the subarachnoid space. Then from that subarachnoid space, we'll see shortly how it's absorbed through these granulations. So, as I already mentioned, most of it goes upward through the gap in the tentorium cerebelli, which is actually superior to cerebellum. So it goes posterior, then superior to cerebellum, and then forward laterally over the inferior surface of the cerebrum. Then it also ascends, as I said, goes up in the subarachnoid space, and it covers the brain superiorly. Then it enters in the bloodstream. Remember that, in the blood that is returning to the heart, so to the veins and to the sinuses. So it goes majorly to the superior sagittal sinus through the villi and the granulations. The granulations. We'll see that shortly. We'll see the picture how it gets absorbed. And some of it, as I already mentioned, goes to the spinal cord and till the coda equina, where spinal cord is ending. So in this picture, you can see right over here the flow that I said, the flow all the way from the lateral ventricle to the third ventricle, fourth ventricle, posterior to cerebellum, then superior to cerebellum. Then from there it comes here to the subarachnoid space. From this subarachnoid space, if you see these structures, these ones right over here, they're called the arachnoid granulations. From these, it's filtrated. It gets filtered and enters the superior sagittal sinus. There is a better picture in this one. You can see it. It's more deep and it's zoomed. So this is the scalp, and we know the layers of the scalp. So this is the superior sagittal sinus. This is the superior sagittal sinus, and this is the subarachnoid space. So from this subarachnoid space, when it comes to arachnoid granulations, right here, from here it's filtrated and it goes to the superior sagittal sinus. It enters the blood through this filter of arachnoid granulations. Then, what are the functions of CSF? What does it do? So first of all, it serves as a cushion between the CNS and the surrounding bones. So it's something that separates the scalp and those bony parts of the scalp from direct contact with the brain. And it acts as a shock absorber. When you have a damage to your brain, it does not directly go to your cerebral hemispheres. First, this CSF stops it. So it's a kind of protector. And it also supports the spinal cord and the brain and maintains their structure, their shape. And simply the brain is floating in the CSF. And also, like some changes in the intracranial volume, if it happens in if there is too much production of blood to the brain, in some cases, like in stress or situations like this, when there is too much blood pressure inside the brain, the CSF production gets less in order to make this to create this balance between the brain, between the blood supply and the production of the CSF, and the opposite. It nourishes the CNS. So in other words, it gives nutrition and like what blood does. Like it also does the function of the blood, and it removes some waste products from the CNS. So it's a very important fluid in the brain and in the human body. Then let's go to some clinical relevance. We have the hydrocephalus or the hydrocephalus. This is a condition. It's a very abnormal condition. Normally, it's from fetal, and it's an anomaly before birth. And in what happens in this situation is that there is an increase in the volume of the cerebrospinal fluid. So there is too much cerebrospinal fluid, which makes the brain bigger. Remember, not the cerebral hemispheres, but the ventricles and the space around it, the subarachnoid space and the bone of the brain itself, the skull. And what are the causes? What are the causes of this hydrocephalus? So it can be excessive production of CSF. There is too much production, overproduction, extra production of CSF. Another cause can be obstruction in some parts of the circulatory route of the CSF. So in other words, we already mentioned where it passes from those interventricular foramina and foramen of Magendie, Luschka, foramen of Monroe, and cerebral aqueduct. If there is a blockage in each of those foramina that are the connection between the ventricles, so this gets collected and the ventricle becomes big, the space goes bigger. And it can be also the interference with the absorption of the CSS. So the arachnoid granulation that I mentioned that filter this and absorb this, they might have some kind of problem in absorbing. That's why it just get collected too much, and the space in the subarachnoid space becomes bigger and larger. This is a picture of hydrocephalus. You can see it's a very large brain because of too much overproduction of the cerebrospinal fluid, or maybe there is a blockage somewhere, or maybe there is not proper absorption of the CSF. Thank you guys for watching today's video. Hope you guys loved it, and I'll see you in the next video.